All right, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for 5 ways that market intelligence can help drive revenue. Before we do introductions and things, I'm going to step back and just cover a couple of logistics while we give people a few more minutes to log in, and then we'll get going with the main content. One of the questions that we get usually multiple times every webinar is, will we be able to get a copy of the slides? Well, even better than that, we are recording today's webinar, and we will distribute a link to that recording to not only all of you here today, but anyone else that registered for today and was not able to actually join us. So yes, you will get that. We will also be taking questions along the way, and we will address them at the end. So you're welcome to enter a question at any point that it occurs to you, and then we'll visit them at the end. To ask a question, if you go to the control panel for GoToWebinar and click the little triangle by where it says questions, you'll see a box there where you can type in a question. Once you've typed it in, click the little send arrow, and it will send it to us, and it will appear on the screen. Actually, it will send it to our moderator. We won't see them until the end, but the moderator will collect the questions as we go and feed them to us at the end of the presentation. So please do feel free to use that question function to put things in the queue. So we're ready to go when we get to that part. Our plan for today, we will start, of course, with introductions of our speakers. Just a very brief overview of why we felt it was important to put this educational session together today. And then we're going to walk through 5 particular types of challenges that we frequently see communities face, and how various market intelligence tools can be used to help address and solve those challenges. And then again, a very brief wrap up, and we'll go into the Q&A. So with that, would like to thank our panelists today very much for all the time and energy that they've put into helping plan and coordinate and bring materials together for this. It is a significant contribution of time, and we appreciate it from all of you. Dave, would you lead us off with introductions?
Sure, thanks, Rob. I'm Dave Hoagland. I'm a principal and architect with Perkins Eastman. I've spent my entire career involved in the aging field, and I view design as a broad view of certainly what buildings look like, but what's driven behind them programmatically, and obviously what the users are perceiving and thinking, which is why being on this panel and being part of this illustrious group is so fantastic. Thank you.
Hey, Jody?
Good morning. Good morning for those on the West Coast. Good afternoon for those on the East Coast. I'm Jody Blyer, and I've been fortunate enough to have worked in senior living for 20-something years. First, for quite some time on the advisory side, working on feasibility studies and planning projects. And most recently, I had the wonderful opportunity to work on the provider side for a national multi-community system. And right now I am back home on the advisory side, but really the most exciting development recently for me is that after 20 plus years routinely on the road, I am now home long enough to have a dog. So I'm a new puppy mom. So that's my most exciting new title. And my fellow panelists are probably tired of hearing about my dog. But Karen and Rob, thank you for including me today in the webinar.
Great. Thank you, Jody.
Thanks, Jody.
Sure.
And thanks, that special note for the West Coasters. Greetings to everybody, and I too want to thank you for joining us today, because with about 40 years in market research, this is really a topic that's near and dear to me. I'm Karen Adams. I'm the Vice President of Market Intelligence with Love & Company, and I've been here for the last 3 years. Prior to that, I had 35 years of working from the West Coast. And I am a very staunch believer in the value and the rewards of the risk management that are inherent in database planning. And I'm also equally strong believer in the value that our consumers provide to us if we'll stop and ask and listen through consumer research. So again, thank you for being here.
Great. Thanks, Karen. And I am Rob Love. I'm the president and owner of Love & Company. Lund Company, for any of you that may not be as familiar with us, is a 40-year-old, 40-year-old firm that for the last 25 years has specialized entirely in the senior living field. Basically, we do everything related to marketing and sales, from market research, which we'll focus on today, to marketing planning, to the creative branding and lead generation, to sales support services. So we very much appreciate all of you taking the time to join us today, and we hope you get something meaningful out of what we have to share with you. First, just again, a little bit as to why this rose up in importance to us as a topic that we felt was important to share with the field. And actually, lots of times it feels like we hear people talk about market studies as the only real form of market intelligence. And that only comes into play when, okay, we're looking at growing and, you know, hey, I know there's lots of market out there, but we have to go get the market study in order to get the financing. So let's just go do it. And there's so many more benefits to market intelligence and market research that, you know, many senior living executives don't really have at the tip of their minds, you know, to be able to draw on when faced with challenges. So we wanted to create some scenarios today and share with you how a broad variety of different tools can be used to solve a wide variety of challenges that communities face regularly. I won't talk about all these right now, but through the course of today's discussion, we're going to talk about virtually every one of the types of studies that are shown on the left side of the screen, and the various tools that can be brought to bear for a variety of situations. So we'll show them within the context of some case studies as we go. But we really want to make sure that everyone's aware that there are a lot more tools and resources to draw on to address and solve problems. Now, we work together to narrow down to 5 of what we feel are the most typical types of challenges we get faced with. And that's where we're going to focus our time on today. I won't read them verbatim to you, but, you know, topics like we're not sustaining occupancy or not sustaining pre-sales. Why? COVID certainly is a major hot topic, and how is that affecting prospects, and how do we need to respond in our communities to meet prospects' current expectations? Number 3 is really kind of the opposite of number 1. Hey, census is great, but our margins are low. You know, what can we do about that? How should we address it? Karen and Jody are going to talk a little bit about the target markets and how they tend to change and shift over time. And how really studying the market around this can help us identify new pockets and opportunities for marketing and growth. And lastly, one of the key things for all of us, when we get through a master planning process and we have our plan and we're about ready to shift into schematic design and design development, really push things forward, the majority of the investment is ahead of us. And that time, right at the end of master planning, is an ideal time to do a reality check, a validation of a project with the market, and make sure what is just in plan really lines up with what consumers are willing to buy. So we're going to talk about all those scenarios and the types of tools that can be used. Jody and I are going to start things off with the first question, which is, and there are some variations of this that Jody will touch on, but you know, we can't reach and sustain budgeted occupancy, or maybe we can't reach and sustain our targeted pre-sales levels. What is it? What's the reason behind it? Is it our market, our marketing, our pricing, our product? You know, what that might be. And Jody, just talk to us a little bit about the kinds of things you've seen in the field.
Sure, thanks, Rob. So in my past work on both the advisory side and on the provider side, 2 consistent issues that I tended to see. First was a lack of pre-sales momentum in both sort of startup development and expansion projects. And the other issue that we would see, you know, pretty consistently is a slow downward occupancy trend. So to the first point on the pre-sales issues, you know, your demographics and your penetration rates, all of the really hard data might be really positive. You might be building a beautiful expansion with wonderful amenities, but don't forget your existing buildings and your existing amenities might need a facelift or might need some love as well. Your new residents are going to be evaluating and looking at that space also, and they're going to want to see a commitment to the overall community investment because they're going to want to be using your existing amenity spaces. So you don't really want to end up with sort of like a have and a have not, or a very, very old and the brand new. Also on the pricing front, be sure that your apartment pricing is based on the market and also the value that you're providing and not driven by escalating project costs. So as to the occupancy issue, I am betting that at least some of you on this call have seen at some point in your careers some kind of downward trend in occupancy, and you couldn't put your finger on exactly why. So in my past, I've seen communities that were, either the only game in town or maybe the best game in town for many years, where they, were just order takers, and that was the place to be. But they weren't, maybe keeping up with the new services and construction and amenities that the competitors were offering. Either new competitors coming into the market with all the new bells and whistles, or existing competitors expanding and improving. So that's something to, really once you take your eye off the ball there, it's expensive to catch up. It's not impossible, but it's expensive to catch up. Also, keep an eye on your markets, because markets can also move over time and populations actually can physically move. So the people you were marketing to 5 years ago may not be the people you're going to be marketing to for the next 5 years. So the thing here that I'm going to leave you with is, think about your environmental scan, your internal and external environmental scan, and it's important to really do that scan regularly on an updated basis. Rob, back to you.
Great, thanks, Jody. So with that as a backdrop, what kind of market intelligence tools can we bring to bear to help provide answers to some of these kinds of questions? Well, to help illustrate this, we're going to share a case study here of a client that Love & Company has worked with for the past about 7 years now. And at the time we started work with them, they were a 35-year-old community in a pretty major metropolitan market area. They had a great, just an amazing balance sheet, but census was sitting at 83%. And it had been, one of the things Jody described, it had been slowly dwindling for a couple of years. The community had a brand new CEO, and he came in with a lot of questions. Why? What's happening here? So he engaged us to do a number of different things. One was the basic traditional demand analysis. Is this market tapped out? And as we looked at this, we saw a lot of strengths for the community, including the location from an accessibility and just a general desirability, very expansive and attractive campus. And the community had a great reputation. And when we did that demand analysis as that fundamental kind of starting point, it became clear that the market was not overly saturated, that there was absolutely room for growth. And we share some of the data we found back in 2013 and what the projections out for 2018 look like in the market. And you can see declining penetration rates and capture rates in all categories, really indicating that there's a pretty decent opportunity for growth here. So the market was not overly tapped out. However, another thing that we found out, though, was that our client community was the only life plan community in that metropolitan market with a significant census challenge. They were stuck around 83%. Everybody else was hovering at 93%. So this just increased that question of why. So we started looking at a number of different tools. One of the things we look at is a heat map. In this particular case, this is a heat map showing the density of age and income qualified prospects in their market area. And as a heat map, it's pretty straightforward. The darker the red color, the greater the number of age and income qualified prospects, the hotter the area, and the darker the blue color, the colder or the fewer number of prospects. Now you see in this case, the client was located north of all the major population density areas, and most of the competitors were clustered around those areas. So that for this community to be successful, they need to be able to offer something special that would draw prospects away from the rest of the market. So there's one challenge. Another challenge, one of our tools is the resident size and mix analysis, looking at what is the product you're offering, what are the mixture of types, how does that compare to current consumer expectations. In this particular case, this community had almost 75% of its residences as 1 bedroom or smaller. That's a major challenge when normally most communities today we're looking at having about that same percentage in 2 bedroom or larger. Another tool that we use is a resident demographic analysis, really delving into what your prospects, what your residents, your buyers really look like, and what can we learn from that to look at the rest of the market in more detail. And in this case, the typical resident was a little bit younger than many communities, pretty affluent. Back in several years ago, it was incomes of around 80,000, net assets close to 1.5 million, home values around 350,000. So we're drawing a fairly affluent prospect. Another thing we look at is entrance fees. Are entrance fees a problem? How do we do that? We look at a market area home value analysis in which we determine what's the median home value in a market, and how does that compare to the weighted average entrance fee of a community. In this case, the community's weighted average entrance fee was just over $200,000, and the median home value was more than $300,000. That entrance fee is only about 2/3 of the home value. There's no affordability issue there. If you're at or below home values, it's an easy decision. But the challenge here again is that they have a lot of really small residences. So we delved more deeply into the pricing side of things. So another one of the tools was what we call a competitive pricing and positioning analysis. And this involves 2 major components. The first is looking at the lifetime cost of living at each community. This evens out, puts things on an apples-to-apples basis, whether a community is life care or fee-for-service or 90% refund or declining balance, by looking at what's that total cost to a resident over the lifetime they're in the community. And the main takeaway here is you look at competitors 1, 2, and 3, is every one of their comparative prices has a minus in front of it. Everybody else was significantly less expensive than this community. But on the right-hand side, we also evaluated each of those communities through tours on almost 20 different characteristics from the consumer's perspective and rated them on each of them. And this particular client had the lowest product score in the market. And remember, the highest price. So we take all of these things and put them together, and there's a significant value mismatch of the price and product. They're the highest price with the lowest product score. So significantly overpriced relative to competitive communities. Lots of small residences, and we didn't touch on this before, but some of the reasons for the low scores were really dated residential designs, tired common areas and amenities, higher levels of care were very institutional, and then dementia. So, Jody, you're in the community, you contract with us to do this type of analysis and bring the information to you. Is it your market, your marketing, your pricing, or your product?
So the short answer there is yes. The long answer is it's rarely just one factor. Hopefully your organization or your community isn't really hit with all of these at the same time, but it's likely you'll have, a minimum 2 of these factors impacting you. And, it's not always easy to know what you don't know. And it's, a real objective look at what you're doing is critical. And it's difficult as a provider, and me even on the provider side, it's difficult to sort of take that objective view at a 500-foot view. So I would say, even if there's someone within your organization or you look for someone outside of your organization to sort of give you that objective view as to whether it is marketing, pricing, or product, or yes.
Great, thanks. So what did we do? What did the community do? What did we recommend? First, at 83%, you have to take some immediate action to address census. And so we worked to make adjustments to the contracts to be able to bring prices down. You know, we started looking at offering an additional contract option. They only offered life care. Let's do a fee-for-service option to be able to offer a lower price point. And really upgrading available residences was important. But the most important thing they did was they brought in a highly experienced sales and marketing professional who just did an amazing job of turning the marketing and sales facet of things around. But just to give you a hint, the residences were small and dark, had the galley kitchen right inside the front door, and they were totally redesigned to open them up and add on these sunrooms and create much more space. And that became really popular additions to things. But longer term, there's a basic strategic question here at play that many communities face. And that's, if I have the highest price and the lowest product, what do I do with that? Do I bring the price down to bring it in alignment with the product? You can do that, but that has a lot of obvious ramifications, particularly to existing residents. Or do I do something to bring the product up, to bring it in line with the price? And that's the direction we went. So a long-term master planning process was initiated to address all of the different challenges that we talked about. And as part of that, we brought on some new hybrid style apartment homes, to help, fund some of the changes. Today, all these things taken together, the community has been 95+% occupied and reserved since 2016. Again, same sales and marketing director, the VP, she's done just an incredible job. The hybrid homes, they pre-sold in only 4 months. And most of the construction and renovation of all those spaces in the master plan will be done in 2020. So this is a bit of an extreme, as Jody said, example where all these different pieces came together, sort of like the perfect storm of everything going wrong. But a lot of communities face multiple, parts of this, if not all of them. Jody, any final comments before we move on?
So I'd add that, and this was an extreme example, and this did involve a construction project. And for those of you that are terrified of construction projects, oftentimes that's the answer. It doesn't have to be a large construction project, but every answer is not always a major construction project. So those of you that are, really nervous about embarking on a long construction project or master planning, some people think it's fun. I think it's fun. But, I have worked with, plenty of organizations in my past that had very, very high cash levels, but very old plant. So 600 days cash on hand, but 17 years average age of facility plant is a great place, and no debt. It's not a great place to be. And so I think the idea is you want to, smartly continue to invest in your community. So that's on the construction side. I'd also offer, a word of caution for the data nerds like me. Your pricing and your offerings might look good on paper. If you just did sort of a straight paper analysis and your pricing looked fine, or it looked like you had room on your pricing, the road is littered with good intentions there. And that's sort of where coming in and getting that objective look of, okay, well, maybe our price per square foot looks really good, but how do our amenities stack up? How does our plant, how are our furnishings? How is our food program? That holistic approach is absolutely a requirement when you're looking to make those decisions. Rob?
Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Karen to tackle our second question, which has to do with the impact of COVID on communities and wait lists and prospects. So Karen.
Thanks, Rob. So this brings us right up to our very present time. And I think we're all seeing enormous changes, and it's very interesting to see how responses have occurred in the field. Like for me, this is probably the social event of the season to be around 167 or how many people have joined us today. But one of the key questions that I got right out the gate in February and has continued is, how is this impacting penetration rates? So we're looking at markets. What do we do with penetration rates? What's happening with my wait list and with my depositors? And should I continue ahead with an expansion, or am I at risk with the market? And David's had some very distinct questions during this time as well. David?
Yes, thanks, Karen. I think that one thing that we know is that this is a unique time in impacting the whole world around us. But what we also know is that the future is that this is probably just not a one-time event. Our communities in the past have dealt with noroviruses, with the annual flu, and we've shaped and responded to the safety and security of our residents, both in design and program. But I think what this one has brought forth is the tension about intentional communities where people are there for the aspect of community and health and wellness, at the same time congregating people where there are issues around safety when we do that. So I think what we're at is really a new paradigm that's beginning to shift. Sorry, just trying to advance the slide, or maybe Karen, you can do that. For some reason I don't.
Thanks, Rob, because I don't have the hours either, so thank you for that. So, so really for us, there are two ways to answer the questions about effects on the market. One is to wait and observe over time, and the other is consumer research. So this is one of our first, we need to go back, okay, I got it. So this is one of our first forays into this, and we did this very quickly following the initiation of stay-at-home experiences. And the field responded very quickly with a number of surveys to broad markets. We chose to take an approach that to support organizations in testing their very specific local markets. Going back to the question of, I'm in the middle of an expansion, is my market going to hold? So what we found in this is really positive news generally, and actually I can leave it at this is positive news. We had 341 respondents who were definitely planning or very likely to move to the community. 89% of the respondents are definitely or very likely to move now. So those markets really appear to be holding. Only one person of 90 who were definitely planning to move dropped out in the period when they were surveyed. And if you look at the box at the left, or the graph at the left, we're looking at people who were definitely planning to move before the stay-at-home experience, and it's cross-tabbed with their response now. And we found that 72% of them are still definitely planning to move, and another 22% are very likely to move. So again, it's just that the demonstration that the markets are holding, but more importantly to me is the tool. The availability of the tool that allows us to measure where our consumers are, and that can allow us to tailor some of those questions that we need answered. So another question that we raised in the survey was concerns in 4 key areas. And the 4 key areas were the impact of the economy, the continuing spread of the virus, the potential loss of home value, and potential inability to sell the home. And we find that the continued spread of the virus is clearly the biggest concern for people at this point, followed by the economy. I think we have observed certainly that the housing markets have held, and where I live and many places are absolutely on fire. So I think we're seeing that reflected in these responses. And again, David's had some direct responses, created some direct responses to these kinds of issues.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is sort of, for lack of a better, three phases to the way we're responding with our clients. The first phase has been what we're still all, frankly, in the midst of, which is regaining trust with our marketplace. All the things that we've been doing the last 6 months, PPE, safety for our residents and our staff, sanitizing, social distancing, anything that we can do to keep the community healthy. And I think that's a key part of what we all have had to do for the last 6 months. But I think the question is, what then do we do beyond just the policy and procedures and the clinical things we do around infection control? And so many of our clients are telling us that 2 of their key issues, or 3 of their key issues, are around visiting. How do they engage their community and family members? And that many places are witnessing a sort of a resistance for family members to move in just simply because of the fear that they're not going to be able to visit. So we've seen some very ingenious solutions, from glass booths sitting out in parking lots to engaging and taking over units that are on the perimeter of the building, like this example, and just creating a visiting suite that can be sanitized after its use. We've seen rooms divided with glass partitions where the resident comes in on one side, visitors on the other. We know controlling staff entrance, PPE has all been that. But I think the major thing that a lot of our communities are talking about, their major issues in here, is really about the dining experience and how we begin to look at the lifestyle aspects of what's coming.
So another question we had included on the survey were a variety of the lifestyle aspects of retirement community living, and whether they have become more important, less important, or remained about the same. And it's very interesting that the broader environment that we're in has had real concerns around nursing homes and healthcare, and yet our markets in this case are saying, this particular market is saying that access to healthcare, having somebody available in case I have needs, and knowing where my care is going to come from has become more important. So those left 3 bars are the things that really are showing up as having gained greater importance to people in this environment.
So we know that there's going to be extensive long-term change coming. We know that the long-term care industry has been the major headline in all of the news. There's a lot of good output and research available and to be done on small house models. We think that it's going to give us some focus on issues like our hybrid or villa homes, small apartment buildings, less neighbors, less people touching elevators. Is that going to enhance the interest in that kind of product? Just taking dining, for instance, the kinds of things that we're going to see, certainly things that we've already been on a trajectory the last decade of creating smaller dining venues, more flexibility around takeout and room service. All of those things are going to begin to make changes, even just in the basic ways we look at dining. But I also think that we shouldn't just focus on how we're going to design for COVID. I think the question is going to be, how do we rethink these things, and what has happened with the marketplace? Just like this call, we would have all gone to a conference. Many of us would have flown to it. We would have driven to it. We would have done it in person. We've all now enabled ourselves with technology to share in a distant kind of way. How is that going to transform the way we all think about what gatherings need to be? But I think what's interesting is our adoption of technology, and I think this is another research question that Karen and her team are looking at, is how many older adults are now using technology in a new way to sort of create that lifestyle. So how are we going to begin to design differently in the future, not just for COVID, but how we're now living differently? And I'll give you one example. Many ways that we design and size our dining rooms is frankly around the peak people who want to all show up between 5:30 and 6:30 for dinner. And communities have been resistant to reservation systems because of either the technology or even just giving people the flexibility to show up when they want. I think we're going to see a major transformation here about the way and familiarity is with making reservations and actually having appointed dining, which may allow us to shrink some of our dining venues that don't need to be designed for the peak. And then obviously the kitchens and our wait staff also go with those questions. So I think there's clearly about how we're going to redesign long-term for COVID, but I think we're also going to see impacts in the way we deal with our existing and new communities.
So nice segue for me, David, thanks. I believe very strongly that the data are telling us things for our future market behavior. I think we're seeing the needle on the meter move in the use of technologies. And once people are doing that, they're not going back. So there's some messages about products that may be really interesting and exciting to develop or at least keep if we have provided them in our communities, as well as messages for how we message to people. So this question asked people if they were using certain tools that we've all adopted under stay-at-home experience to keep a normalcy in our life. Were they using it before? Did they start using it? Do they want to use it and just haven't integrated it yet, or do they not want it at all? And I want to point out the bars all the way to the left and all the way to the right are video calls, just like we're using here. So we know that people have really adopted this technology, and that middle bar is that they adopted this technology during this stay-at-home experience. And the same is true of telemedicine. How long have we been talking about telemedicine? Now, all of a sudden, we get this pop-up in the rate of utilization. And again, I think that one of the biggest things to me is that I think in a lot of things, we're not going to be going back. The middle bars, the three middle ones, are intriguing to me because these are online fitness programs, online educational programs, and online travel and tours, museums and things like that. And I'm really interested in the not using it yet, but interested in using it. So this has messages to me about potential future programming, the kinds of things people will be looking for and interested in the future that are very worth keeping on our radar and paying attention to going forward. So
Well,
I think we missed a slide. Who's sorting that?
So I think that leads us to sort of the middle of the three phases. We have the what do we need to do immediately to respond to the safety of our residents? How are we going to change into the future? But where are we in this middle zone, maybe for the next 6 months, year, where we need to begin to think programmatically differently? And I think that's where those three middle bars are still untested. We just don't know yet. And I think that that's where we're going to, just taking dining programs, for example, we're going to think differently about the kinds of ways that we present dining options. And we've all been, for the last decade or two, talking about this is the generation of people that want choices. They want the flexibility. They want it on their terms. So some people are going to be very comfortable going to an online class. Others may want to be an instructional opportunity in a socially distanced way. And we may be adding technology into our fitness rooms and our program spaces and our classrooms so that we can do those distance events for people that want to be at a distance, but those who want to participate physically in it can also be in attendance. So we may have more cameras and videotaping capability than we've ever seen before as we build on the computer and technology infrastructure that we have.
So key points that came out on the consumer research in this case, and I want to keep pointing back to the fact that these are very interesting data, timely data, but it's the tools that become valuable, that we understand we have them in our arsenal, can apply them quickly for key questions really about, as Rob has pointed out, increasing revenue and decreasing risk. So prospects are still highly interested in life care, in life plan community living. They're definitely much more technology oriented or digital friendly than they were prior to the pandemic. And they're very concerned about the virus, which hopefully will have a time limit on it. But some of the other prior data suggests we have some ongoing things that we can address that came out of this pandemic. Rob?
Okay, thank you. So our third little scenario here is pretty much the opposite of the first one. Now, in this case, census is high, but the margins, the balance sheet isn't so high. What can we do to address that? And this is a frequent question that we get. Communities that may be struggling with negative operating margins, a shortfall in funded status or unified funded status from their actuarial study, or simply the inability to afford the kinds of updates that they need to make in a community. You know, what opportunities are there to increase revenues? So we're going to do this through another case study. This one from another major metropolitan area community. Census had consistently for years been more than 95%, but yet the margin was really tough. The funded status was only 88% versus a target of 110. An actuarial new pricing surplus for new entrants was 1% versus a recommended minimum of 10%. So what can we do here? Is the community able simply to increase pricing to address that? So we brought to bear several of the same types of tools that we talked about earlier. First being this market area home value analysis to take a look at how are our entrance fees doing relative to median home values in the market. Now, in this particular case, a little surprising for many of us in most parts of the country, the community had a weighted average entrance fee of $516,000. Yet it was only about 60% of the median home value, which at the time of the study was about $840,000, a very high home value market. So an immediate indication from that is we could push up entrance fees to be able to help address some of this without affecting affordability from a home value perspective. But can we do that from a competitive perspective? We'll revisit that in a second. We also looked at the residence mix to see, is this a challenge like it was in the first community? And while this community does have a little bit higher proportion of the smaller residences than our first example, it's not really as far off. But what we do see is that heavy margin pressure is really strongest on those smallest residences. So what can we do about that? So the key part of this becomes really that competitive pricing and position analysis. How does this community really compare versus the competitors in the market, and do they have any room to move or not? So the first piece of that, as we shared in the previous example, was looking at the lifetime cost. And very quickly, just glancing at the red parts of the chart, you can see other communities were more expensive, most expensive. So it clearly indicated that there was room to move on pricing relative to the competition. However, when we did the scoring again of all those competitors and evaluated what the product offerings were relative to current consumer expectations, we again came up with the bottom score in the market and significantly behind some of those competitors. So in this case, the community's price and value position were actually in line with each other. It wasn't like the first one where they were out of line. We were the lowest scoring and the lowest price, and that can make sense for a lot of communities, but not when your margins are virtually non-existent. So the basic conclusion was, yes, you can increase your pricing. You have room against competitors and room against home values. But if you want to do that, you're going to have to bring your product up in line with those competitors as well to support that point. And that required master planning and really relooking at the community, which is where Dave and his team came in.
Thanks, Rob. So the interesting part of this community is that it wasn't about a major expansion. As Jody said, it wasn't about a big construction project to add units. It was really about, as Rob said, realigning the product expectations. One of the unique things about this community is that they are college affiliated on adjacent to a college campus with a very strong program that had been evolved and for years had been sort of the calling card of this community. One of the things that I think is very important about the market research is asking people what they're thinking. And it was interesting because in this case, Rob and his team came in before we were involved in the community and very succinctly began to identify the qualitative issues. It wasn't just the quantitative, the unit size and price point, but what were the qualitative differences between this community and others? And I think because it was only a little over 15 years old, nothing really physically had changed about it. In some cases, it was still the original carpeting in the hallways, but nothing had really shifted programmatically. And I think a lot of the outlook had been that they were so unique with this niche idea of working with and on a college campus that a lot hung on that. And I think what we learned from some in-house surveys was that the market had begun to shift, that they were expecting not only this very intellectual academic opportunity, but they were expecting everything else that any other community would expect about fitness, wellness, and dining. The other thing, which I'm sure many of your communities are dealing with, is that you may have multiple generations of residents within your community. And by that, I don't only mean age, but that you have some of what people call the pioneers. You know, this was a 15-year-old community. There were quite a number of people that had moved in when it originally opened. There was also kind of the next gen, the people that had moved in the last 3 to 5 years that had sort of a perspective about what the marketplace had to offer and why they chose to be there. And then there were what we called the newcomers, which had only been there at less than 18 months. And we really broke down our survey and data looking at those 3 subpopulations. And as you might expect, some of the pioneers, people that had been originally there, the community was just fine the way it was. It's why they bought it, was the value they were looking for. Some of those next gen folks had made a decision to move to this community, knowing that maybe it didn't have all the bells and whistles, but it had the important things that they were looking at. But really within the newcomers and with the prospect list, we began to understand who was out in the marketplace and their expectations about dining programs, flexible dining contracts, everything that was making the community not only unique from an intellectual standpoint, but unique in the way that they were going to pursue wellness and also all of the other ingredients of their community. So they had definitely focused on the intellectual. They had great physical swimming pool and fitness programs and spaces. Probably needed a little more focus on the programming side. But I think some of the other pieces weren't quite there. And that's what began to sort of tease out sort of how does this place work as a community? And what was interesting was because of the affiliation with the college, there was a lot of interest in the performing and cultural arts. There were some challenges getting to the college, just physically. Hills, steps, distance was becoming, particularly in bad weather. We were also seeing this interest in collaboration, the sort of in-betweeners. So you've got college students, grad students, and then you've got people that are really interested in the intellectual pursuit. But there were really no places that they could come together that were sort of neutral ground. There were no sort of melting pot spaces that really helped reinforce that fabric of community. So what we worked on was we took their town hall, reconceptualized it with new entry, created a new pre-function lounge space in addition. So there was a little bit of construction to create that all-day melting pot for people to come into. Taking the one big dining room and creating 3 different dining experiences, creating and enhancing their existing cafe into more of a full bistro experience, and then really rethinking the image of the common spaces from what was before, and again, just data that just had not been refreshed in those 15, 18 years. And beginning to look at not only how the spaces were used, but how they presented themselves to the community. And things like a bar where maybe 15, 20 years ago when the community was first conceptualized, that wouldn't have been the focus. But clearly what we were hearing from the surveys was the ability to have flexible dining options, to have social opportunities that revolved around cocktails and wine, but also offered a different bar menu, and also creating that sort of all-day lounge space, someplace that people could drop in, they could have informal meetings, grab a cup of coffee from the bar, have late afternoon snacks, and also allow for people to gather as they went into the main dining venue. So really the opportunity to rethink it visually, but also really re-enhance the programming based on the work that Rob and his team had done.
Thank you, Dave. And so just wrapping it up, this was another success story. The entrance fees wound up going up by, on average, almost $100,000, the monthly fees by just over $800 a month, yet census held steady at 95% plus all the way along. So they definitely had that room to move. And I think the kind of work Dave and his team did in terms of looking at the design and showing a clear picture of what the future is going to hold was a key part of that. All right, Karen and Jody are going to take our fourth question, talking about shifting target markets.
If someone could advance the slide, please. Okay. Dave, I just want to say that whenever I see pictures like that, I can't wait to retire and move into one of these beautiful communities. So congratulations on that. So as I mentioned earlier, markets can move over time. Seniors can move as developers come in to buy older homes. It's certainly even happening in my area where I live. And you see these population shifts over time. So that's your market moving away from you. But also think about, are there potential pockets of prospective residents that you might be missing because they don't fit into the definition of your primary market area? 10-mile radius, 7 or 8 zip codes that you've traditionally drawn from. So think secondary market area, and we see these, crop up from time to time. And so just think about what that opportunity is to reach beyond the typical boundaries due to a religious affiliation where your churches or synagogues might draw from, or like in the last example, affiliation with a college, or potentially even a lack of competition. And Karen has a great example of this. So Karen?
I know, I'm sorry about that. I was trying to pull it up to be ready for you. So this was taken from a study that was done some time ago for Martin's Run, a community that doesn't exist as an independent community anymore. It's now part of Wesley Enhanced Living. It was primarily a Jewish community at the time of the study, which had some impact. And when you see the community's location relative to the density of the market, it suggests a certain market area, which you can see on that visual, right? So I'm going back to tools that graphically give us hints and key information about our market. So in fact, the study area shifted to the north and to the east. And part of that is certainly that, again, it was the target market, the Jewish community. But when you look at where the competitors are located, you can begin to see the influence on the marketplace of this. So again, really looking at those data and being able to lay out what's going on in terms of density of market, as well as the competitive environment, are really invaluable to leading us in the right direction for both planning and development, but also for sales and marketing.
Okay, so just to wrap up, that example that Karen gave you, it was a very unique community. But think about your own community. What's unique? What could give you a broader reach into a potential secondary market area? Not everyone is going to have that strong religious affiliation or an affiliation with a college, but the competition out there is it's very steep, and it's getting even steeper. So if you're not already looking to see, where can I reach from that's outside my traditional area, you want to start thinking outside those traditional boundaries. And there's some great examples in the presentation today. Karen, back to you, I think.
So just again, not just to bring the case home of how the data can be applied for numerous questions. This was really a marketplace we were looking at in terms of moderate income, and it shows us where our community is located, as well as the distribution around them of a more moderate income target population. So it really allowed us to do some planning around the development for their campus. Jody?
So let's talk innovation for a minute. I know everyone's working really, really hard just to keep COVID out of our communities and our lives, but thinking differently about how we're going to deliver services in the future is the key to solving these problems. So, just a couple examples of communities I've worked with. Some are landlocked and not able to add programs like assisted living or rehab or a pool or community spaces. And in that case, they looked for opportunities to affiliate with other partners to provide those services, like the Y or the J or the local community club, country club for services and amenities, and health clubs. If you don't have assisted living, I've seen organizations look for a standalone assisted living in their market and cut a really good deal with them to serve their residents, even life care residents. Really, I am sure there are standalone assisted living facilities in pretty much all of your markets that would love to have some of your residents there. Can you turn a wing of the health center into a COVID unit? What kind of creative opportunities are there? Landlocked communities, we've also seen, are looking at satellite campuses that may not even have a full continuum, and instead that they're leveraging the services at their hub campus. So and there's a lot of really smart people in senior living, and many of them are on this call. So as you begin to speak with your colleagues in senior living about how they're addressing these challenges, you'll find that there's some really innovative ways that many of your peers are accepting these challenges.
So we have one last heat map in the area of innovations and looking at opportunities in the marketplace. And this again, we use this tool to really look at the opportunities for satellite campus development. So when we lay out the existing competitive environment within a market and begin to look for pockets of new development, in this case specifically for satellite, we can see up in the red circle to the north and east some real potential opportunity, which then can be explored further and business plans developed for that process. Rob, your intro?
Right. Karen, will you take us home with number 5?
You bet. So David.
And Dave, actually.
Dave.
So I guess our last case study is around sort of the testing of master planning and understanding how market intelligence is going to begin to shape the project. So as I shared earlier with you, one of the things that's very interesting to me is not just to know how many age and income qualified folks are out there to fill this community, but really the qualitative underlying of where their interests are, what kind of product are they looking for, and how we align that product with the design opportunity to input that. So this is a client of ours. This is Jewish Senior Life in Rochester, New York. And they have had a significant major campus, heavily healthcare. They just, with us, completed converting their 400+ nursing campus into a greenhouse model, both with new construction and renovation. And they have an existing small life plan community with 90 units and 60 assisted living on their campus as well. And they had another 20 acres adjacent that they had always envisioned for expansion of their life plan community, the Summit. Probably thinking that it was cottages or maybe hybrid buildings. But the question was, what is everybody really looking for? And so we had started some planning with them before Karen and Rob's team got involved. And there were clearly some issues that needed to be dealt with. There was a declining Jewish population. They were fully kosher, so how were they going to be able to appeal to a broader market? How did they rethink the sort of heaviness of the healthcare and its influence on the campus? How are they going to be able to add more amenities with only 90 units, while they were very rich in some respects with a nice swimming pool and some fitness programs, but they really didn't have the quality and quantity of amenity spaces that residents were looking for. And certainly as we began to look at the dining programs, more innovation around that, particularly with kosher and non-kosher hybrid options. But they knew that they needed to appeal to a broader market. So then Karen and team came in.
And yeah, thank you, David. David got us in there, which we have been ever since delighted with. So we use what we call consumer research events with some key elements or key objectives to them, which were to determine the overall acceptance of the campus by both Jewish and non-Jewish populations. The declining Jewish market suggests that the community needs to diversify, which it has been anyway over in its healthcare, and to determine the elements that are needed to increase market share. So that was the second major objective of the work. And then to identify key points of differentiation. The community was looking at was asked the question of whether they should be building cottages, largely because most other communities in the market area had cottages. And the data we were able to put together, both from a market analysis and a market assessment, looking at the overall competitive environment and then subsequently the consumer research events, led us to the conclusion that developing a different type of housing product would be in the interest of the community and not necessarily chasing the same things that exist out there. So our consumer research events, sadly, are right now we're not using them right now because they are significantly sized groups of older people. They're like large focus groups. We often say focus groups on steroids. However, we are right now putting together virtual versions of those because all those tools we're adapting to get our normal life back. We are putting together tools to be able to do these virtually. So they are larger they're large focus groups, and we use several groups in order to build a deep enough basis to have really representative data for our market. They're an interactive tool, so people are together to discuss, to raise their questions, and to bring out the qualitative data. And then we use electronic devices that allow us to measure data as we would a survey in the same environment. So we get those anecdotal data from them, and we get quantitative and qualitative data from these tools. Thank you. If somebody's doing that, because I can't find the little arrows. So that in that process, these are very, very carefully crafted for the flow in the process. We design them to have an introduction that describes life plan communities or the type of communities we're working with, to lead people carefully through a flow that introduces them to the sponsor, to the location, introduces information about the program, the residence type, the types of residences and sizes, the amenities, and finally to the pricing. And again, that's where that flow becomes so important, to be able to draw out the types of information that we're looking for, and they are very often used for size and price type questions. These can often lead to significant modifications to the program, and in the case of Jewish Senior Life, we certainly did shift the product type to hybrid buildings. They made sense in that specific environment, and they made sense for doing something different and differentiating the campus. Consumer research events can be applied prior to starting market planning, and we often use them to get other team members' questions answered as well, to provide a really good foundation for planning and design, as well as after the completion or mostly through the completion of master planning to validate and test what we have. So just some key findings, and again, the tool in this is what matters to me, to point out some really critical things, although the key findings are always very interesting and invaluable. We asked people at the end of the process in a session, would they consider moving to this community or to this project if it's designed to meet the kind of things that they've described to us. Now, what I want to point out is that this is segmented into a number of market segments. So we had a wait list and a lead list. And we also had a non-Jewish population and a Jewish population, which we got through those electronic transponders to ask that question and be able to go back and cross-tabulate the data. So we saw a very strong response, and we did get a good handle on the non-Jewish population to allow us to determine the ability of the campus, of the community to draw enough market outside of their traditional constituency groups. Again, we found that the hybrid or villas came up very strongly. There were none existing in the marketplace. These were very well received. Again, gave us the validation and the comfort level to begin to design around something that looks a little different for people. Interconnectivity of buildings to community spaces, or at least good proximity, has been a really big question for us. And in this case, we found that this is a very valuable and important part of the community. So it began to really drive and shift and change some location factors for this project. Parking is, again, one of those things that's coming out in every single market, that structured parking and not just covered parking has become enormously important and continues to grow. We were able to test that for a price point, not just if you say, would you value this or would you want it? The general answer is yes. But again, the ability to ask the question around willingness to pay for that was another really key piece of information that came out to allow some careful design considerations. So David has some additional features in this and other tools.
So in the column of be careful what you ask for, I asked for the qualitative data to guide the design and tell me what the community wanted. So we had a 20-acre site that would have been lovely for cottages. The marketplace didn't want cottages. We had a very constrained existing community that was hemmed in by an existing ring road, and yet the marketplace wanted everything connected. They wanted hybrid villa buildings, but they didn't want them distant or disconnected from the main community. So they liked the idea of the sort of autonomy of the small apartment building, but needing to be connected. And then lastly, as Karen shared, the idea of underbuilding parking was very important. And one of the reasons our site was so constrained is that we are surrounded by wetlands and a high water table. So how to build structured parking, how to do villa hybrid buildings, how to keep it all connected, and how to deliver the kind of product that they were looking for. So Mike King, the CEO, provides wonderful, wonderful leadership to his community and agreed that a really interactive charrette or workshop format with board members and some residents and then executive leadership would be the way to look comprehensively at the marketplace, the financing, and the product. So out of that workshop, which we worked with them all day long in a series of exercises, we go off at night, sketch different alternatives, and come back and present them the next morning, get Karen's immediate feedback, get financials immediate feedback, get resident and board perspective. And what we ended up coming back with was an opportunity to actually move the ring road, was kind of a breakthrough at about 2 in the morning, to create more site to build those 2 new residences that would have half of the first floor would be under building parking at grade. So we couldn't go down because of the water table, but we could get a couple first floor units and then several floors of apartments above in the sort of hybrid or villa configuration. We then provided connectors that link back into the 2 existing L-shaped apartment buildings. So we met the requirement for parking, villa buildings, and connected. And then we looked at all of the common spaces and realized that as we grew this community from 90 units to as many as maybe 140 or 150, that we needed to address the diversity of activity programming, dining options, better fitness, better performing arts and activity spaces. So that was about really reconfiguring their town center and expanding it and creating a new front door. And that was sort of putting all of the pieces, that it wasn't just that there was a market for 50 new residences on this campus. It was all the other market research, market intelligence pieces that led us to a conclusion that will make this a successful expansion of this community.
But, you know, of course, real kudos to organizations that ask and listen and then respond based on what they hear. So I've been a big believer in asking older adults for way longer than a lot of the market has believed in, because the feeling was that we know how to deliver good care. When they come, they'll like it. But we know that markets are changing, have changed, and we know that this type of work is more important than ever. So it's also a whole lot of fun. Kudos for listening. And again, it saves an awful lot of pain in developing things that might not actually meet that market expectation. So these were used in the beginning of the process to answer some of those design questions. They can also be used at the back end to validate all the pricing, to validate the sizes, and to validate the concept. Last but not least in this, I really want to stress how much I believe in consumers themselves. I think they're our strongest tool in visioning the future. I often tell them in groups that when people say, how did you know that 5 years ago? It's because they have raised some little nub of a thought. So our consumers are really our strongest tool in visioning the future. And in this case, they were invaluable. So, Rob, you have key takeaways?
Just a couple, yes. So right before we head into the Q&A part, I hope this has been helpful to you. Again, our goal that we set out at the beginning was to try and provide real examples of things you might be able to think about and apply in your communities, you know, to address challenges you may be facing, and to try and expand the vision of market intelligence beyond, oh, we just need a market study and figure out what our penetration rates are, to, hey, we have a number of operational or financial or marketing challenges. How do we figure out the answers to those? So I hope that's been helpful for you all today. Before we open up for questions, and a reminder, you're free. If you haven't already put questions in, please go ahead and type them in now. I would like to take this opportunity again to thank Jody and Dave for all the time that they've put into helping prepare and coming and share their thoughts and ideas with you all today. We are very appreciative of that, and thank you, Dave and Jody, and thank you, Karen, too. With that,
Thank you, Rob.
we are going to open up for questions. And so the question is, what type of momentum should providers be looking for? When is it a concern versus a blip? Jody, I think that's kind of picking up on our first topic of the day, which is, you know, okay, so things are starting to trend in the wrong direction, whether pre-sales or census. You know, at what point do you decide it's not just a blip, but it's, hey, it's something we really need to pay attention to? You want to take that one?
Yeah, I can start with that one, and then maybe you or Karen want to chime in from your perspective. So when you start taking your 10% deposits, you are going to have the first 2 months. You should have quite a bit because you've got this pent up demand, and then it just starts to taper off. But when you know, positive momentum is really just a sustained forward momentum. You are going to have some months that you sell 0 and some months where you maybe just sell 1 or 2. But really, if you find yourself in maybe a 3 or 4 month, I would say, you know, maybe even negative sales because you've got maybe 1 coming in and then 3 cancellations. When that starts to become a pattern over, 3 to 5 months, and maybe you're not getting more than 1 a month, I think then it's time to reevaluate why. Is it as Rob addressed before, is it your market? Is it your product? Is it your marketing? Is it your positioning? Are you, do you have very, very high entrance fees and high monthly fees, but the finishes are just really basic? So I think at that point, it's time to start asking those questions. Rob and Karen, I don't know if you guys you can't come at it from a different side than me.
No, I think it's I would answer it very similarly. The words I would put on it is way too often communities that may have been sitting at 93 or 95% for years, they don't call us to start looking at things until they hit 83. It's like, that's too long. You hit 90, that's, to me, something's not right if you're sitting at 90. You've got to start putting things in the other, moving things in the other direction.
Yeah, the 90 is a key number because that's where, really above 90 is where communities start to make their profit. So as you start to dip below 90, 90 is sort of your threshold. So I think that's a good threshold to look for, Rob.
And
question.
Wait, Rob. So I think another trigger, though, for existing community is to always keep your own finger on the pulse of what's going on. The Rip Van Winkle syndrome is a very bad thing to get into because monitoring on an ongoing basis who's doing what to whom, who's developing, who's expanding, who's redoing their amenities can be a real flag to begin to really continue to look at yourself within that market context. So I think it's just another place to watch data and to monitor that can be a very early indicator. So know your own market environment. Thanks, Rob. Sorry.
Great. Next question. What are some things that can be done to sell the small, undesirable apartments in the event they cannot be combined or expanded? I've certainly got some thoughts there, but Jody, I don't know, or you've been on the operator side for a while. Are there certain tricks or things that you would apply?
And I have seen this done successfully, and this is not my idea. I will credit Brad Paulus at Continuing Actuaries for this. This idea is these really small units that might overlook the garbage area or just very undesirable view, older types of apartments that you're just really not going to be able to sell. So maybe it's a studio or a 600 square foot apartment, and that's called the Elm, and you have 50 of those. So if there's maybe 10 that are really a big issue, is just rename them instead of the Elm, rename them the Oak, and offer your deep discounts on those and only those. Make sure that your sales folks understand that those deep discounts are only available for this type of apartment. And if you're a life care community, maybe you don't offer life care on those since they're going so inexpensively. And I love that idea, and I've seen that very successfully. And again, it's not my brilliance.
Right. So two other things come to mind, Jody, and you just made me remember this. I remember nearly 20 years ago, a community, a friend of mine, CEO, basically took all these studios that they had. They were very small, no market interest in them, and they sold life care contracts on them for people that didn't move in. But they were fully covered. They paid an entrance fee. They were paying the monthly fee, less meals. And they had a life care contract at the community. So that's a rather unusual way of handling it. I'm not sure I would recommend it as a standard practice, but that was one. But the other thing you said, Jody, that is something we're firm believers in is we do what we call individualized residence pricing, where we will work with the community to go through and look at every residence and what are the good things about that residence and what are the challenging things. You mentioned like views. Are you overlooking the dumpster or overlooking a pebble roof somewhere? Or are you like right next to the dining area, right next to like the amenities where people really don't have to walk far, and that's a very desirable place to be. And we'll go through and score them all and assign price ranges. So you get, instead of just like you said, all the Elms are not priced the same. All the monthly fees are, but not the entrance fees. There may be a range of entrance fees. So what do our consumers want? They want choice. So how much more am I willing to pay for the convenience of, hey, this view in this location? Or how much do I want to save? Because I'm figuring I'm not going to be in my room that much anyway. I'm going to be out and about in the community. So I'll pay a lot less, and we'll put the shades, bottom up shades in the window, so I never see the dumpster, only looking out the trees in the distance. There are definite things like that that can do. So we have one more question here. And again, if you have others you'd like to share, please go ahead and enter them in. Karen, this sounds like it may be headed in your direction about consumer research and consumer sentiments. It says, I see a lot of studies out there about how older people are feeling, kind of generally, but I'm not sure how much I can extrapolate from them. My community has a distinctive position. What thoughts do you have? Not to get you on the spot.
I know, I would really like some clarity around that question. Distinct feelings that people have in the current environment. So to me, I would be looking at the data tools and the context that they're placed in, because almost always there's something really valuable to take out of consumer research. But I think even with the best consumer research, it's really important to understand the data behind what's being said there. So I'm a big fan, as you already can hear. Understanding the questions, the context, and the flow is important, and sort of what were the objectives. So maybe if you read that to me one more time, I can come up with more things, Rob.
Well, let me try and tackle it from a different perspective, and picking up what I think you really were trying to share earlier. There are a lot of national studies that say seniors think this and seniors think that, but what's really most important is what are your prospects thinking, your wait list, your lead base. Because the particular thing about this question was, my community has a distinctive position. And that could mean a broad array of things. That, like, for example, one of the ones we talked about earlier was a university-based community. Others might be religious affiliation, or a variety of different types of distinctive characteristics. So how do your prospects in your markets, how do they really think about your community? As I think ultimately the question, I would not personally try to read too much into all the national surveys and say, well, then that's what my unique market thinks as well. I would encourage you to go directly to them and ask, because every market is a little different. Every niche market is a little bit different.
Well, good answer. And I think that it really, I thank you, because yes, markets are very distinct. And so especially if you have special characteristics, but basically every community has special characteristics. It has a different location. It has a different sponsor. It may just have a slightly different feel to its common spaces. Markets are very, very local. Thanks, Rob. That was a good catch on that.
Sure, and we're closing in on the end of our time here. So it looks like we did get one more question here. We'll go ahead and tackle that. Karen, I'll give it a first shot and let you add the color commentary to that. But it's, what is the best way to access / obtain existing market data, like ongoing data? Again, there's room for interpretation of that a little bit, but here's how I'm going to interpret it. Existing market data, some of the key things there are things like home values. Well, you can get that online from sources like Zillow, for example, and you can see what's happening in trends in your market. Competitors, what are they doing? Many communities that we work with have their marketing directors every year reach out to the competitors and gain information on what each other's doing, current pricing, and so forth. And at least on the not-for-profit side of the field, people, markets often have what we refer to as co-opetition, where the competitors somewhat, but we're all in this together as a not-for-profit field, and they share things, and everybody's kind of aware of what's going on. the piece that most communities do not have direct access to is the demographic data. And there, having some type of description, a subscription to a resource, we happen to use Esri on our side to be able to get updated projections of age and income qualified prospects and look at, pretty much you can go to a micro level, look not just at zip codes, but at census tracts and so forth. Really see what's happening in a market over time. Karen, I'm not sure what you would add to that.
Yeah, well, what I would add again is pushing out to the future. So I think for us, we're looking very seriously at our databases. So as you look at where you get your data today, large databases are becoming more sophisticated and more dynamic. And we have traditionally used data that come off of the American Community Survey, which was traditionally census. It's becoming more important than ever to really look at the data we're utilizing, and there's more tools out there. So we're seriously evaluating our tools, certainly. And so I'm glad Rob points up that mostly we're using them on a subscription basis. You can certainly go out to the census for that piece of data. It's just more efficient on the subscription side to get exactly what you're looking for.
All right. And with that, we are going to wrap up. It's almost at the end of our window. So I would like to thank all of you who joined us today to listen in to this. Thank you, and particularly for staying through the whole way. That always tells us that we've provided something of meaning and value to you. So you will get a survey, I think, when you leave this, and we very much appreciate whatever feedback you can leave for us on today's topic. And lastly, one more time, Dave and Jody, thank you once again so much for all the time and sharing your thoughts with us and with everyone today. And Karen, thank you. So with that, we will sign off, and everyone be safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.